My next guest, as I just mentioned, is Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan. She's also an Air Force veteran, a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. She's been vocal on the issue of climate change, very vocal, and is a co-sponsor of the Big Cat Safety Act. This is not a Netflix ad. Representative Houlahan, it's great to see you again. Let me just start out. You've been very, I guess the word would be strident, flamboyant, out there on climate, and said we can't mess up. Tell us what you're thinking.
Sure, and I really appreciate being here. And in addition to being on the Armed Services Committee, I'm also on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm also on the Armed Services Committee. And these conversations about climate are national security conversations. And so if I need to be outspoken, it's only because it's our national security that's at risk if we are not. If I need to be asking people to think of ways that are actually actionable rather than just beautiful big ideas that are not, I'm guilty of that, definitely. Because when I was a young woman in the late, 80s, 87, I was a cadet in the being hopefully commissioned soon, shortly. And I was in training at Tyndall Air Force Base at that time. And even back then, in 1987, we were having brownouts and problems where we didn't have enough time during the day when it was cool enough for us to be able to train. And fast forward 30-something years later, and that's become not only a problem, but Tyndall Air Force Base has been obliterated from the map by a hurricane. And that has all kinds of consequences and implications for our readiness and national security, not just in the USA, but we're seeing that across the globe as well in many of our bases in the Arctic or in Asia. So this is a real issue that we should be taking very, very seriously. And I agree with Representative Kinzinger and Fortenberry that this is not a partisan issue. This is a safety and security issue.
Well, let me ask you a question on this. You know, with the Biden administration coming in and President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, they both made very clear that the environment is a high agenda item, that rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, but it's also, the WHO, it's the WW. The integration of these issues is very real. So American presence matters. But if you step back and say, okay, what's really changed? Where does the rubber hit the road? Where do we really need to get traction? I'm interested in what you think is missing in the low-hanging fruit agenda. What do we really need to do to get back into a place where we're not just talking about joining treaties there, but we're able to kind of move this nation forward to both greater consciousness about the national security implications of environment, but actually doing things, which is going to include regulation, and it's going to include some costs and some winners and losers.
Right. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of most sad about, I'm a freshman here in Congress, and I'm an engineer by education and by background. And not only am I an engineer, I was formerly a chemistry teacher, too. So one of the reasons why I wanted to be here in Congress at a federal level rather than in government at a state level was a concern about security and a concern about science. And I thought that I could be able to bring both of those skill sets specifically about biosecurity and specifically about pandemic. And I feel like that I arrived at the scene of the crime too late. We have been negligent over decades, arguably, maybe even longer, in terms of our responsibility to recognize biosecurity as a threat. And we have been delinquent in kind of down payments into that, not only domestically, but also internationally. And so we've kind of walked off the world stage in the last decades, not just within the last administration, and our responsibility to make sure that we aren't in this place that we are right now. So first and foremost, I believe we need to be restored to that place of authority and that place of responsibility as being one of the leading voices in the world on the importance and role of science, the importance of understanding that climate change is real and it's causing things like pandemic. It's causing things like migration of people because of that, and conflict because of that. And so if we're able to restore our place on the global stage and our responsibility in the global stage, that's a first step. But we also have to make sure that our budget reflects our values. And I think Adam Kinzinger mentioned this as well. Think about how expensive this last 9 months has been. The tragedy of loss of lives, but also the volume of dollars that we did not have to expend and the catastrophe that is our economy. Had we not abandoned things like pandemic response, had we been more thoughtful about zoonotics and its influence, we have the knowledge. We just chose not to prize that and value that in our budgeting process and in our infrastructure.
Representative Houlahan, I'm going to ask you an unfair question. It's admittedly totally unfair, so do with it what you will. You came in as a teacher of science. You have a lot of colleagues. You know, Fortenberry and Adam Kinzinger seem to be very much with it in my book. But if you were to, in the aggregate, grade the literacy of your colleagues on these issues of science and of bio-awareness, if you will, or conservation awareness in this dimension, what grade would you give your colleagues?
That is probably a super unfair question. But what I will say is that the Congress, the body, needs more people who have that background, right? To complement the people who have other useful backgrounds as well. And the fact that we have only about less than 15 or so people with STEM or STEAM backgrounds in the Congress, in this body, is unfortunate, because we're being asked every day to think about issues of technology, cybersecurity, biosecurity, artificial intelligence. Literacy is a skill. Numeracy is a skill that more of us could use in the Congress and that we could use in the country. So I think that I would rather not give a grade, but I'm not sure that we're all passing. How about that?
Would you give a grade to the Trump White House?
I believe that we have been enormously disturbed by this administration and this White House. I believe that we have lost tens of thousands of lives because of that irresponsibility when we talk about COVID, but also if you just talk just in general about our responsibility as a leading nation in the issue of climate as well. We can't afford to lose time, and we've lost time.
I have a question for you from our audience. Philip Selleck, who is the Park Projects Director of the National Park Trust. Philip?
Though conservation is so very important to our survival, it is not commonly understood to be. It should be integral to what we do every day. What strategies do you envision are necessary to give the public an understanding of cause and effect and to integrate the practice of conservation into daily life, as well as promoting bipartisan support in the political arena? Thank you.
What a great question, Philip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a huge question, really, because it's got so many dimensions to its answer. And one thing that I would want to focus on is I actually did I helped as a consultant for the Philadelphia Zoo a while ago, and I was focusing for them on education and what the modern zoos of our world should be doing to help people understand the importance of conservation, the importance of diversity, biodiversity. And zoos, have a bad rap in some cases, but they are one of the last places that allow regular people to understand our role in the world and what we can do to be responsible to it. And so what I would say is the first thing is an education. People need to understand empathy for things that are not them. And I'm not even just talking about animals, flora and fauna. I'm talking about people too. We have a real empathy problem. And that's one thing to the question that you had about, bipartisanship. We have a responsibility as leaders and representatives of our communities to make sure that we're talking about civility and decency amongst people, but also civility and decency towards things on our planet that are not humans. And that's a really important thing. The other thing when we talk about empathy is if you bring it back to home, right? If you bring it back to your home and hearth, we can talk about the impact that things like conservation and things like preserving our environment have on families, particularly on women and children. And those are the hearts of our homes. And if we know that we have a poor environment that people are living in, whether it's because they don't have access to food or water, or whether it's because they are being chased out of their communities due to environmental changes, we know that we will be less safe. And this is a conversation that resonates with people. Right. It resonates with people when we think about the individual people in their lives, and then we think about the implications to the community and to the planet.
Well, Representative Chrissy Houlahan of Pennsylvania, thank you so much for your work. We didn't get to talk about the Big Cat Safety Act, but in a way you were obliquely referring, I think, to part of that and how we think about wildlife at home and abroad. So I hope you'll come back and talk about that as well. Really respect the work you're doing in science broadly, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.